We're starting right here at Policing at the Professional Crossroad, going back a couple of sessions. This recording will be for both Monday, March 23rd, Monday, March 16th, and Monday, March 23rd. So please, at the end of this video, create one set of questions, of 5 questions, and email me the questions by Monday, March 23rd. Please email me the questions, at least 5 questions from this video by Monday, March 23rd. It's going to be quick, and so you may need to stop and pause it, take notes, rewind it, re-listen to it again. It's going to be different from our experience in class because I won't have the opportunity to understand what questions you have while I'm going through the lecture. But please take whatever amount of time is necessary to rewind the video and understand what I'm saying in the way of lecture. We'll pick up with the presentation assignments after you guys return back to class. So we're starting here, going back a little bit, and starting with policing at the professional crossroad. Let us begin. As you may recall, we talked about policing has come through a lot of economic turmoil. There have been cities that have filed for bankruptcy. There have been financial problems in places like Newark, New Jersey, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, in Detroit, Michigan, in places in California as well. Stockton is a good example of a California city that has experienced problems. And so we pick up here at the part in history where financial problems have caused police departments to think differently about how they deliver services to their citizens and think about how they can continue to deliver very excellent police service, but at the same time cut back on expenditures and find new ways to operate more efficiently and effectively. But as Dorothy Gallo has said, creating change in police departments can be like bending granite. And we've had this discussion in class, and I challenge you to understand just exactly what this means. Well, we've gone through the presentation on changing environment for policing. We know that the early 1980s were the beginnings of the community policing era of policing. And so when we look at the beginning of community policing in the 80s up to the present, 2008, 2010, up to the present, we should ask the questions: what are the differences in the environment for policing between 1985 and the present? What are some of the challenges that are facing policing today versus when community policing first started at the end of the reform era? What factors are driving change in the way that police are working? And then what is meant by a dualistic system of policing? We discussed this term in class, and I hope you understand exactly what it is we mean. Reviewing all of the research conducted since the President's Commission in 1967 and available research that's in English, the President's Commission reaffirmed the findings of the 1970s and 80s that the standard practices of policing, those included employing more sworn officers, random motorized patrol, rapid response and criminal investigation, failed to reduce crime when applied generally throughout a jurisdiction. So, in other words, more officers didn't necessarily drive down the crime rate. More officers didn't necessarily equal less crime. So, but now police are facing declining budgets and the rising cost of sworn police officers. Police today are facing challenges like terrorism, like new immigrants, both legal and illegal immigrants, racial discrimination, intensified accountability for performing services and disciplining officers. Police unions, police officer health and wellness are also issues that are facing the police today. So what are the factors driving this? Well, these factors that are driving the changes in policing includes the threat of terrorism, intelligence-led policing, and DNA analysis, to name a few. Now, each of these developments transfers initiative in directing operations to specialists who collect and analyze information and away from general duty police and the public. Ironically, now, these changes could also undo the signature contribution of the 1980s, that being community policing. Policing now may be facing a clash of cultures as the public increasingly demands participation in the direction and the operation of policing, while at the same time, police agencies become more self-directing and self-sufficient in their use of intelligence. So what do we mean as we look at the persistent pull of professionalism? What do we mean by crime suppression, by science and objectivity, by centralized authority? Well, when we look at the persistent pull of professionalism, that is, police officers tend to want to gravitate back towards reform era policing, the kick butt, take name, the very heavy-handed policing tactics, the tactics of rapid response and motorized patrol, the tactics of throwing more police officers at a problem, trying to reduce the problem by strengthening police officer numbers, or reducing crime, seeing the police primary mission as being crime suppression as opposed to crime prevention. So then we talk about crime suppression. When we talk about objectivity and science and central authority, science in particular, crime suppression in particular, centralized authority, which is the same as a bureaucratic organization structure, those are all rooted in the reform era of policing. So community policing, though, largely reversed the idea of the police primary mission being crime suppression, the idea of science in policing, that for every crime there is a criminal, and for every second that we could reduce response time, we would increase proportionately the probability of actually catching a crime in progress. Those are relics of the reform era. This bureaucratic paramilitary, military type structure in policing, relics of the reform era. So how has community policing largely reversed these relics of the reform era? When we look at professionalism, we looked at the increased notion that police departments should actually focus on crime suppression, dictated by objective crime analysis, that authority in running a police department should be based on a centralized figure, the chief or the director of police or the minister of the interior, directing all police operations. But the newest approaches to policing are intelligence-led policing and predictive policing, as opposed to crime fighting and crime suppression and rapid response. So there is a change in the approach to policing now versus during the reform era. So let's talk a little bit about intelligence-led policing. Well, intelligence-led policing is intelligence collection and data analysis, and this data guides the selection and implementation of police policies. This intelligence, this data, typically drives where we deploy resources. It drives where we strategically position assets in order to predict the location of a crime, or in order to be in the right place at the right time. So we use intelligence, we use information, we use data, we use sources, and we analyze it to determine the best, most efficient way to deploy police assets and police resources. Predictive policing, on the other hand, is directed information-based patrol. It's rapid response, but supported by fact-based pre-positioning of police assets. Predictive policing is being able to intelligently determine where a crime is likely to occur, and then positioning police resources and assets in a way where they can either capture the criminal in the act of committing the crime, or actually prevent the crime from ever occurring. Predictive policing is proactive, intelligence-based tactics and strategies and policies, and it focuses on the police actually fighting crime. So, how does predictive policing differ from community policing? Well, in determining the definition of community policing, we must ask the question, who or what is the community? What makes community policing more likely to succeed today than in the 1960s? How are fairness, accountability, and legitimacy crime control strategies? Fairness, accountability, and legitimacy are all prerequisites in a community policing philosophy. And how does it help police and the public resist the pull of police professionalism? How does community policing help resist this constant pull for police officers to go back to the reform era? We should be asking those questions, and we should be able to answer those questions as well. When we look at technology and the professional era, what we found is that technology can actually distract attention away from imagination and judgment, from trust and legitimacy. Technology, the patrol car, for example, that's technology that moved officers off of foot patrol, out of neighborhoods, into cars running from call to call. How did that isolation from the public, from seeing people face to face, affect the trust and judgment and imagination and legitimacy of officers? How did that affect the relationship between the police and the people that they had gotten to know when they operated on foot patrol? So a question that you should be able to ask is, how can technology distract attention away from imagination and judgment? How can the focus on having technology do all of the work for you rob a police officer of using his or her imagination and judgment, and rob the police of having trust of the community and being viewed by members of the community as legitimate policing authorities? How can that happen? Well, when we look back at the 1960s and 70s and 80s, the 60s in the United States was the civil rights era. The 70s was characterized by wars and Vietnam War, and by drugs and other really tumultuous crime and public behavior. And then the 80s ushered in the community policing era. So what did we learn from the end of the reform era into the beginning of the community policing era? Well, what we learned is most of what police do is not crime control. That effective policing requires building trust and legitimacy. The trust and legitimacy depends on fairness and decency. That policing depends on judgment and the discretion of the street level officer. The officers that are more likely and more often coming into contact with the majority of the members of the public. And we learned that this centralized top-down management can actually impede innovation to the extent that we have very, very thick policies that direct police officers on everything to do. That creates a reliance on the policies to determine what officers do, and not depending on the officers to think or be creative or be innovative. And so I believe that when we look at a police department that has an incredibly large volume of policies, what they're saying to their officers is, we don't want you to think, we want the policies to guide your actions. And to the extent that we try and run departments 100% by top-down policies and don't leave judgment, discretion, creativity, and innovation to individual police officers, we can stymie, we can impede innovation in police departments. And so we should understand how all of these dynamics work. But still, the question is, why does police professionalism continue to hold appeal for thoughtful police executives and scholars of policing? Although we understand now what some of the new science is telling us about rapid response and reactive and retrospective investigation, that some of the long-held beliefs in adding more police officers to lower crime have been debunked. That by and large, what we believed during the reform era of policing that we thought worked for policing does not, in fact, work. So if now we know that what we used to thought would work for police don't work, why does police professionalism continue to hold appeal for thoughtful police executives and scholars of policing? You know, I think it's because it's easier. Not because it's better, but it's easier. It's easier to measure the number of arrests. It's easier to measure response time and gauge police performance by numbers of arrests, the numbers of calls answered, the response time, by numbers and not quality. It's a lot easier to measure the kinds of numbers that professionalism produces. It's a lot more difficult to measure crimes prevented and to measure problems solved. It's a lot more difficult to measure citizen satisfaction. Those are the tenets of a community policing philosophy. But yet many police executives today are not buying in. They rather stick with what's easier: professionalism, professional policing. But we believe, according to Christopher Stone and Jeremy Travis, that policing must move towards a new professionalism, that there may be some value in some of the tenets of the professional or reform era, but there are also requirements to enhance some tenets of that era. One is accountability. Police officers must be more accountable. To whom? To their command, to the police departments, to citizens, to all of their stakeholders, special interest groups, to the law, to policy. So there must be some enhancement in police accountability. There must also be a larger focus on police legitimacy. And we'll have an entire lecture that we discuss police legitimacy. Officers are required to be more innovative. What I've seen here recently is officers or even employees who work twice as hard as other employees are twice as effective. But the best, most creative employees are 10 times more effective than those who are not creative or than the average employee. So that tells me that we should work on helping police employees understand how to create and innovate, how to be thoughtful and creative and look for new and different ways to address and resolve problems. And then finally, new professionalism will require what we call national coherence. That's because in the United States, there are over 19,000 police agencies. Every agency has its own policy, as opposed to countries with a single national police only has one set of policies. Well, when you have 19,000 different police agencies, each one with their own hiring standards, each one with their own sets of policies, it becomes very difficult for police officers in one area to be able to move laterally to a police department way across the country, because the policies are different, the rules are different, the expectations are different. Well, under this idea of national coherence, that means that policies around the United States, police policies are starting to look more and more alike, so that there is coming to be an acceptable standard in policing. We have organizations in the United States like CALEA, the Commission on Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies, that are advocating national standards for policing. And so policing in the United States is moving towards a national standard where the policies from one agency to the next are starting to be coherent with one another. They're not there totally, but we believe that they are moving in that direction. So then we look at this professional policing. We ask the question, how is professionalism versus community policing? Well, professionalism is believed to be what's called hidebound. It's steeped in rules and procedures and process. Professionalism versus community policing is too hierarchical in management. It's too narrow in crime response. It's too much at odds with actual policing. And professional policing versus community policing is very technical. It's technocratic, it's rigid, and it's cynical policing when compared to community policing. This old professional model of policing is removed from the community. It's run to a call, get in your car, run to a call, talk to other cops on the radio, interact minimally with people, try and take care of the problem and move on to the next call. So this old professional model is isolated from the community. Tactically speaking, it contains just a limited set of routine activities. Police, they fight crime, they make arrests, they write tickets, they cite people, they break up disturbances. And under this professional model, what police are responsible for essentially is crime fighting. And along with that crime fighting responsibilities came a limited set of routine activities. The old professional model is characterized by the centralized management structure I've already mentioned several times during this lecture. It brought with it, compared to the political era, improved technical skills and hiring standards, police services, and decreased political influence. It also brought along with it 911, 911 call prioritization, rapid response, retrospective investigations, strict rules, but it also ushered in an era of racism that we continue to see happening in policing today. So under the old professional model, with what I just indicated, what was the plight of ethnic minorities in the United States under this professional model of policing? What is the plight today under the model where police departments in the United States still hang on to and operate under the old professional kick butt take names model of policing. Old professionalism was transitioned from old professionalism came along as a necessity to transition from the political era into the reform era. But now from the reform strategies to the community strategy has required yet another transition from the professional era. What elements of the reform era are now easier for the police to integrate into their organizations? What elements of the reform era are now easier for the police to integrate into their organizations? Think about that and jot down a couple of ideas on your paper.